Griezmann is one of the hardest players to rank in an all-time list. It's hard to argue against the fact that he's a genius with the ball at his feet. He has a World Cup to his name as well as one of the greatest Euro performances ever, but on the other hand, he has never won the league. In fact, he has only won 4 club trophies and his record in finals is dreadful, having lost the final of the World Cup, the Euros and the Champions League. Even when it comes to getting love from the fans, he isn't the luckiest of guys. With one scandal after the other, there isn't one fan base who's been left with no reason to dislike him, which is unbelievable considering that at one point he was the third in command. They used to say Barcelona have Messi, Real have Ronaldo, and Atletico have Griezmann. But at this point, it seems that many barely remember Griezmann or at most remember him as a player who had 1 or 2 good seasons, a player the streets won't forget, who, ironically, tend to be forgotten about. But the funny thing is that this rejection isn't at all strange to Griezmann. In fact, he wasn't meant to have made it as a footballer at all. He was short and slow as a kid, and if you know anything about academy football, then you know the system is extremely unfair. Clubs want results as fast as possible, and when you're a late bloomer who gets tossed around by kids the same age as you, you're doomed. And that's what happened to Griezmann at first. He had all the technique, his family was well off, well connected, and invested in his football dream, but no matter how many trials they arranged for him, it was rejected. Metz, PSG, Lyon. But the answer was no every single time, and it broke his father's heart to have to break the bad news to his son every time. Regardless, by the time he was 14, his dad was out on vacation in Croatia and Griezmann went for a trial at Montpellier. At first there was nothing too special about it, but then a man who had taken a pit stop in Paris to visit an old friend who worked at the club stopped for a second watching the kids and Griezmann stuck out to him as he was the only kid not wearing the Montpellier kit. Immediately, it became obvious to the man that his touch was years beyond his age, so he waited for the end of the session, approached Griezmann who sat down in the stands eating some cookies, first asked him for one and then asked him if he would like to come play in Spain. The man's name was Eric Ollatz. He was a scout for Real Sociedad, and despite the fact that Montpellier would once again reject Griezmann, he was convinced he had found the next great French talent. But by then, it would be Griezmann's parents who would stall his career, with his dad repeatedly rejecting the scout's offer and saying, "I already know how this story ends and I'm not gonna drive 600 miles just for my kid to get rejected again." And it wasn't until Eric pulled some strings and got someone at the club to call the dad that he finally gave in. Despite this, against all the odds and against the wishes of his mom who insisted he should not have gone, it all worked out and Real Sociedad invited him to join the club, but the scout noticed that Griezmann was struggling to learn the language or make any friends there, so knowing how shy he could be, he moved in with him. It was supposed to be a temporary thing, just to get adapted. 3 months tops, but instead, they ended up living together for 6 years, with Eric becoming almost like a third parent. In fact, considering Griezmann only got to go over to France to see his parents every 3 months, Eric was more present than either of them. Once again, at the age of 16, if it weren't for Eric, his parents would have taken him back home after they came over to watch him play at a youth tournament and realized he was constantly getting benched, saying that if he's not gonna make it, he might as well be home with us. Little did they know that that exact moment would lead Eric and Griezmann to start special late-night extra training sessions, working on his defensive skills, transforming his game, shaping him into the jack-of-all-trades he is today, taking over the next tournament as the best player and top scorer, and forcing Real Sociedad to bump him up to the first team and give him his first contract. And here's where things get really difficult, as this would all be very awesome if it wasn't for the fact that Eric is currently being trialed in court after some shocking accusations of extremely inappropriate behavior towards a few of his other proteges, as well as possession of some other highly inappropriate content that involves children, making it extremely upsetting to know that he lived with Griezmann for 6 years when he was just a kid, 800 miles away from his parents. But regardless, for obvious reasons, I have to mention that this is an ongoing trial, that so far this can only be considered allegations, and though Griezmann had cut ties with Eric even before these stories came out, he has never accused him of anything like that, so I guess we'll move on with the story. His first starts came right in the preseason as a result of some other players getting injured, and despite being just 18 years old, Griezmann convinced everyone immediately, to the point that by the 5th match day he would start being regularly given the chance to play the full 90. And by the end of the year, he would have played 40 matches in total, being one of the center figures in Real Sociedad's promotion to La Liga, earning his first call-up to an international tournament, the Under-19 Euros, even winning the whole thing despite not being exactly one of the stars of the team. Over the next 2 years, both Real Sociedad and Griezmann developed together, getting readjusted to top-tier football, first finishing only 2 points off of relegation and then managing a mid-table spot, which could have been much better if not for Griezmann's injury at the start of the season, leading them to 8 defeats in 13 matches. Mind you that the moment Griezmann came back, they went on 7 matches without a defeat. Regardless, as I was implying, this was very promising, and the next season, they came through on that promise. Despite an awful start with 5 defeats in the first 9 matches, followed by a 3-week-long injury which left the team hanging right above the relegation line, once more Griezmann came back to save the day, leading them on one of the greatest runs in the history of the club, with only one single defeat over 23 matches, beating Valencia, Sevilla, Barcelona and Atletico, with that single defeat being a 4-3 away at the Bernabeu. As you might imagine, by the end of the season they had made history, securing only their 4th ever qualification to the Champions League and the first in 10 years, with Griezmann at the center of it all, becoming one of the youngest ever players to reach 100 matches in La Liga. At this point, very clearly, his 5th season should have been something out of this world, something to establish him as the next great thing, but instead, days before playing the decisive World Cup playoff match with the under-20 national team, he decided to go clubbing with a few other big names like Niang and Ben Yedder, which would have been bad already, but was made much worse the moment they lost to Norway and lost their spot at the World Cup, enraging the federation, who banned them from international football for a full year, which even led Griezmann to consider switching allegiance to Portugal, as, after all, not only was he of Portuguese descent, but he often spent his summers there, and his grandpa had even been a football player, so yeah, this was almost a thing. But instead he decided to wait it out and keep playing for France, and this hardship actually served him right, as he felt twice as motivated now that he felt like his career was in jeopardy, maturing as a player and as a person, and going on to have his best season so far, going on a run of 13 goals in 16 matches following that dreadful week, being repeatedly one of the most decisive players in the squad along Carlos Vela, closing out the season by securing a place in the Europa League, which was probably for the best, considering that their Champions League campaign had been horrible, scoring a single goal over the group stage and not winning a single match. Alongside all of this, Griezmann also secured another impressive title, being the French player to score the most goals over the year of 2013, leaving the entire country puzzled over where he had come from, since after all, he had never played in France. Regardless, soon not only would the French public get to scratch that itch, but they would also get to fall in love with Griezmann, as despite not getting too many chances at his first ever call-up to a tournament, the 2014 World Cup, he would impress with his fighting spirit and touch the hearts of every fan by falling down in tears the moment they were eliminated. After that moment, there was no denying it. Griezmann would be the heir to Ribéry's spot, and seeing this, Atletico pounced on the chance to sign him, paying 30 million for the player, who Simeone would instantly transform into a false 9, using him as a replacement for Diego Costa. This change was miraculous. It turned him into a goal machine, assisting the decisive goal in the Spanish Super Cup against Real Madrid to give his team a trophy on just his 2nd match for them, eventually finishing the league season with 22 goals, which could not seem like much compared to Ronaldo's 48, but you have to consider that Atletico were much more defensive than Real, who scored nearly twice as many goals as them. Regardless, it would be the following season that would simply skyrocket Griezmann to legendary status. With Mandzukic gone, Griezmann quite simply had to step up, and that's exactly what he did, going on his most prolific season ever, still to this day, scoring 32 goals and providing 6 assists, leaving Atletico just 3 points shy of the title in 3rd place. And again, you could insist on the argument that Ronaldo and Messi scored so much more, but well, there's a reason that year Griezmann won the league's Player of the Year award and not them. Just look at the top scorers list that season. Griezmann was all alone, going head-to-head against not Ronaldo and Messi, but against prime BBC and MSN, while the most help he got was that of Fernando Torres, who was well past his prime and managed just 12 goals across all competitions. But the league wasn't even the highlight of the year. In the Champions League, following 5 goal contributions in 6 matches throughout the group stage and a goalless draw against PSV in the last 16, Griezmann got a brace against Barcelona to force his way into the semi-finals after losing the first leg, and then scored a decisive away goal versus Bayern to get Atletico to the Champions League final. But once again, he fell just short of the title, missing a penalty midway through the match and watching rivals Real Madrid take the trophy. And despite all of these low moments, nothing compared to what came next. Midway through the season in a friendly against Germany at the Stade de France, the players were suddenly startled by a massive explosion. The stadium was quickly evacuated and the players were informed that multiple terrorist attacks had just taken place in Paris. Soon, the next location was hit, a musical theater known as the Bataclan. Griezmann, knowing of her love for music, immediately felt the urge to check on his sister and she didn't answer her phone. Soon it was confirmed she was indeed at the venue. 130 people died, including, for example, Lassana Diarra's cousin, but thankfully, Griezmann's sister barely escaped with her life. However, I'm telling you about the attacks not just because of how much they impacted Griezmann's life, but the whole country. By the time they arrived at the 2016 Euros, everyone wanted to win it more than ever, to give the people something to smile for, and Griezmann delivered above everyone else. After being rested throughout the group stage, Griezmann opened the knockouts by scoring both of France's goals in the last 16. Then, he put up 2 assists and another goal versus Dark Horses Iceland, and finally, he once again scored both of France's goals versus Germany to put them in the final. With 6 goals already, it was easily one of the all-time greatest Euro performances. Only once in history had someone reached that tally. It seemed almost destined for Griezmann to win the whole thing. In fact, they were the heavy favorites against Portugal, and Griezmann did force Patricio to some insane saves. Eventually, Gignac even hit the post, but in the end, Eder's goal decided the match, and on the best year of his career, Griezmann came out of it with a bitter taste in his mouth. Trophyless. At least, he was named the player of the tournament, which was great, of course, but yeah. Back at club level, it seemed Griezmann was starting to feel an urge to pursue something more. There were talks of United, Arsenal, and some even said Real would break the transfer record for him, but nothing. Instead, he started off his season in horrendous form, scoring just 6 goals before New Year's, though it didn't stop him from attaining one of the biggest accolades of his career, a place in the podium of the Ballon d'Or. Ronaldo, Messi, Griezmann, once more. The second half of the season went a bit better. He even scored the goal of the season against Real Madrid, but then another defeat against his rivals in the Champions League semi-finals led to some criticism by the fans, and to make it all worse, he ended the season by claiming on live TV that there was a 6 in 10 chance that he'd join Man United, which, of course, never happened and only served to turn the fans against him right before he went on another awful start to a new season, even letting Atletico go down to the Europa League before putting the cherry on the cake by upsetting everyone with a picture of him wearing blackface at the end of the year. But Griezmann is a funny guy, because right when you thought the season would be unsalvageable, he got 11 goals and 3 assists in the span of 9 matches, and then proceeded to score against every single team he faced in Europa League, scoring 2 goals in the semi-finals against Arsenal and then another 2 in the final versus Marseille, to grab the trophy and get the fans on his good side once again. And guess what he did then? He completely ruined it by creating a gigantic media circus surrounding his possible transfer to Barcelona, even scheduling an entire TV show on national TV where he would announce his decision, only to announce that he would be staying at Atletico, making it all seem like a desperate plot for attention, and ironically, not even getting that much media attention in the end, with Lopetegui's sacking right before the World Cup taking up all of the headlines. In the end, he had pretty much just turned both sides against him, with the Barcelona players getting vocal about the second-hand embarrassment they felt. Regardless, as always, this was exactly when Griezmann decided to pop off at the World Cup, scoring the decisive goal in the first match and then taking over the knockout stage by opening the scoring against Argentina, then assisting the opener and scoring the second goal against Uruguay, as well as assisting the only goal against Belgium, being named the player of the match. An award he would also win for the final match where he scored and assisted to put France in front and allow them to take the biggest trophy of all. However, even if this was the peak of his career, the World Cup wasn't a solution to all problems, as upon returning to Atletico, he would be booed by the fans who were still upset over his whole stunt before the World Cup, and this would be the start of his downfall. Struggling to deal with all of it, despite still making it to the podium of the Ballon d'Or by the end of the year, he would experience his least prolific season since joining Atletico, which only led the fans to resent him even more, escalating to the point where before the last match of the season had even been played, he had already announced that he was leaving the club for good. There were likely 100 different teams he could have gone to without causing much fuss, but of course, he went with Barcelona, the one club where both players and fans were already kind of fed up with his antics, and as always, to make it worse, he also made sure to talk to Barcelona before they had talked to Atletico, making sure to wait until his release clause dropped from 200 to 120 million before leaving, with Atletico eventually taking them to court over that issue. At Barcelona, no matter what, Griezmann always seemed like a shadow of himself. He never got the fans to love him, and he never seemed to feel included in the team, always looking like an outcast and mostly sticking around other French players like Lenglet and Umtiti, to the point that only 6 months later it was already being rumored that he could leave to PSG or United. With Barcelona slowly descending into chaos and the media making the most out of every bit of locker room drama they could find, his numbers hit all-time lows. And once the pandemic came around, things got completely out of hand, scoring just 1 goal in the 11 matches left in the season, even being laughed at by Simeone when he came in versus Atletico with 1 minute left on the clock, and culminating on that famous 8-2 defeat to Bayern. At this point, it was even rumored that he could move to PSG in exchange for Neymar, but somehow he stayed, improving in his second season, getting 20 goals and 12 assists in just 3,900 minutes, even being very decisive as they won the Copa del Rey. But then came some drama with Piqué, and then Griezmann watched Atletico win the league without him, which hurt even more considering he never won it, and then a clip came out which displayed Griezmann laughing at some racist remarks Dembélé made about Asian people, and then he went on to underperform at the Euros, which finally convinced Barcelona to offload him, ironically loaning him back to Atletico just 2 years after paying his release clause. Once there, things were never like before. Griezmann was never seen as an undisputed leader, he never managed to get the numbers he used to, and by the time his second season rolled around, they were even refusing to play him for more than 30 minutes per match, despite his good performances, as their contract with Barcelona would force them to sign him permanently for 40 million if he were to play more than that. It was just sad to watch, but thankfully, they eventually agreed on a mid-term of just 20 million, with Griezmann coming back to Atletico for good, pulling off some good numbers despite still lacking the playing time he used to get. But it was right there when things seemed finally settled that a 31-year-old Griezmann took over the 2022 World Cup, now playing a much more defensive role and acting like the team's maestro, seemingly winning back the hearts of all football fans as he led France to the final. Only to once again disappoint everyone with an underwhelming performance that saw him be subbed off after just 70 minutes, with L'Équipe awarding him with a rating of just 3 out of 10, as France lost out on penalties and Griezmann left everyone more confused than ever.